So there was a provocative headline that ran a few days ago talking about how Donald Trump might not run for a second term. Now, this floats among a lot of speculation going on right now. Some people arguing that, this is definitely something that might happen. Some people arguing that this is absolutely absurd. So, Chris, what do you think about this? Is this just crazy?
Yeah, I don't buy it. I think the man would do anything to be president again. I don't think he's going to drop out. I think the minute he leaves office, he's going to be sued by a number of states, including New York. I think that by accounts by people including John Bolton and other people who were there that Trump picked, it's not like they're his enemies, have said, yeah, look, when he talks to foreign leaders, he's talking to them about how they can help him get reelected. So this is an individual that I think he sees the rest of his life, right, which he doesn't have that many years left just because he's not a young man. I think he sees the rest of his life could largely be determined on whether he wins this next presidential election or not.
Well, but some people are suggesting that that is a reason why he may not run, right? Because Donald Trump has such an ego that he won't run, right? Like, because I hear people use the ego argument to say, well, of course he's going to run. And to be clear, I do think that he is. I'll get to my theory on why this story was planted in just a second, right? But some people will use the ego argument to say that this absolutely means that he will run. But can't you just turn the ego argument around and say that, well, but he knows in some sense that
Right.
he's probably, like, you look at the polls right now, the poll numbers are terrible. They're absolutely terrible. And if he actually thinks that, oh, well, there really is nothing I can do, maybe his ego will just leave him to run out and, oh, well, I've got some excuse, gotta go. Here's another guy to run.
But we've already seen his reaction. So the last time around, he won, and he was talking about how the elections weren't fair, right? And he won. He won the election, and he was
Right.
saying that they were rigged. And this time, him and Barr are already coming out and saying, anytime a ballot goes through the mail, there's fraud that's taking place. There's this weird idea he's putting out there that other countries are producing mass amounts of ballots to apparently just drop out of airplanes on us or something. I mean, how
Right.
would that?
Just
It
absolute
doesn't even
fake.
make sense. Doesn't even make sense that if
Right.
if you handed a city a bunch of fake ballots, okay, how do you get those things processed? It doesn't really make any sense at all. But he'll put it out there, and people will believe it. And I couldn't believe it after the last election that I actually ran into living, breathing human beings that said, "Oh yeah, I think that Donald Trump would have had more votes had it not been for all these illegals voting." And people were believing it, people were buying it, and I think there are, apparently 1 out of 3 people in this country will buy it again the next time he says it. So I think even if he loses, he'll be able to leave with his head held high and say, "Well, we all know I really won anyways."
Hmm. Well, some people think that he might not even leave. I don't know. I don't think any
Right.
of us really know what'll go down there now. But that does go to the bigger debate, or I don't know if it's really a big debate, but the debate of whether or not when Donald Trump makes things up, he really believes these things, or whether or not he's trying to manipulate, right? Because I mean, if in his heart he's sitting there thinking to himself, okay, well, I'm looking at the numbers, I might lose, but he's just this showman, right? He's a talented showman, so he's coming out misleading, manipulating, doing all this stuff, and in his heart, he's a massive egotist, whatever. He's like, well, I don't want to lose. I mean, he might not. He might not. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he surrounds him. I mean, as we've seen, he surrounds himself with people who just tell him yes and pump up his ego and tell him how great he is all the time. And I think that's what he'll end up doing. It's just, he's never had to learn to actually compromise with people, have real discussions. He'll just say a thing, and if he can get people to do what he wants, that's a win to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a victory if he gets his way. It's just all about the end goal, whether he has to lie. Like, to him, I don't think there is any difference between lies and truth. He says words to reach a goal, and I don't even think there's a consideration of, ooh, I had to lie to get that done. I think that's just the same as telling the truth to him. I don't think
Hmm.
there's really a difference there.
I mean, I guess, like, though, in order to resolve that, we have to ask why the story ran in the first case, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, some people think that, okay, this story ran because, I mean, as purported by the story itself, a high-ranking Republican operative who's in the no, who really knows what's going on, is the one who was, spilling the deets out there. But we also have to keep it realistic. Like, my opinion on it is, honestly, I think, yeah, Donald Trump is going to run. And I think the reason why this story ran the way it it did and in the sort of newspapers that it did run in is because there are Republicans out there who don't like Donald Trump's mean tweets and who are looking at those bad poll numbers and are sitting there thinking to themselves, it's time to go. Like Donald Trump, I do not want to lose my seat. They're worried about a massive Democratic wave because they're looking at the polls and they're worried Donald Trump is going to take us down. So they think, well, we've got to replace him. We've got to replace him. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Like if you replace Donald Trump with another guy this late into this thing, and it is going to be a guy, by the way, if the Republicans do it, it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster. I think it would be worse, much worse than if if they kept Donald Trump on. I mean, it would be just a complete sweep.
Yeah, I don't see, if you replace them with anyone at this point, I don't see that person being able to make up enough ground in the polls to do well. Although it does lead into this fear I have that once Donald Trump is not the head of the Republican Party, that they're going to put someone in place who knows when to keep their mouth shut and not give away the game every time they're talking to reporters and just say the crimes out loud to everyone who's listening. That is a fear I have, and I would rather see that come about 4 years from now than in 4 weeks from now. So I hope that's not the case. But even if they replaced him now, I don't see how they could pull that together in time to be effective for the Republicans.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting sort of divide right now in the Republican Party, Chris. There's a divide between the sort of truly pro-Trump, sort of Republicans out there who are truly like, I support Donald Trump. I'm behind the general ideology that Donald Trump represents. And then there is this kind of old guard of the Republican Party who does seem to ideologically disagree with Donald Trump, at least when it comes to the mean tweets, when it comes to the things that the temperament of Donald Trump, they disagree. They think that his temperament is a bad reputation for the party and are sort of hedging their bets right now that if they're quiet, if they don't say anything, or, maybe even if they criticize Donald Trump here and again, Ben Sass, that, it'll be a good look for them going forward because they think that after Donald Trump is out of office, that the Republican Party is going to reform, that the Republican Party will change, and that things are going to go back to how they were, the good old days of George W. Bush when we were only, invading another country, killing 1 million Iraqis, the good old days when, of course, we were still, engaged in active imperialism, right? We'll go back and my stats will be good, right? I mean, I honestly think that's the strategy of Ben Sass, right? Like, I actually do think, right? Like, people say, oh, well, Ben Sass just agrees with Donald Trump. He's just saying it for show. I think that he actually does disagree on some issues. But what we also have to consider is a selection bias, right? It's a selection bias, which is to say that Mitch McConnell doesn't necessarily agree with Donald Trump either, right? So the only things that come to a vote are the things that the Republican GOP does actually agree on. They're not even getting to the infrastructure packages, for instance, that Donald Trump agrees on. And there's some other things like, some police crackdown stuff that the GOP in the Senate doesn't want to go forward with, that Donald Trump wants to go forward with. And so, when you hear those statistics and rattle them off, like, okay, Ben Sass is, talking about criticizing Donald Trump's tweets, but then he's out here voting with Donald Trump like 90% of the time. Well, there's a bit of a selection bias there. I do think that Ben Sass disagrees with Donald Trump, and that he's hedging his bets on there, but it's not any better, the views that he wants.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more disagreement with him, but none of them have the guts to stand up and actually do something about it, right? We've heard a number of Republican senators come out and talk about spending and say, what is this spending that's been going on between George W. Bush and Trump? I mean, they spend as bad or worse than they accuse the Democrats of doing. And I think there are senators who really want to turn that around. I wouldn't be surprised if we see sort of a resurgence of the Tea Party trying to get spending under, a small portion at least of the Republican Party going Tea Party and trying to get spending under control again. I mean, there's going to have to be some type of evolution. I just don't think it's going to happen in the next few weeks.
Well, only if a Democrat wins. I mean, that's the thing. I actually don't think that government spending was ever an ideological debate, because if it's going into the debt or deficit, there's no cost to anyone else, right? So it's not like, I don't know that that's really a political dispute or a political debate. The only issue is when it's government spending going to help minorities and groups. I mean, that's the only thing that they're interested in cutting. When it comes to cutting the military spending, when it comes to cutting funding for federal funding to police departments or the various kinds of programs which aid police departments, Fine on me. That's how you do it. That's good government spending. That's government using tax dollars right. When you talk about spending money for education, when you talk about spending money to invest in having the world's largest particle accelerator, no way. Got to cut that thing out. Can't do that. But when you talk about, so I mean that's just the typical situation that we've always seen. So I don't know that we would actually see a reemergence of the Tea Party. I mean, the Tea Party seems like, to me at least, a Barack Obama phenomenon. Am I wrong in
Well,
that?
I think you'll see it come again with Biden, because you'll see it immediately. Day one, you're going to see we can't have all this spending. Anything the Democrats try to pass, whether it's college tuition, some kind of health care for people, whether it's even just something as basic and in our Constitution as voting, right? And protecting voting rights, you're going to hear that's going to cost too much money. We can't pay for any of that. So I do think it's going to become a big issue with that, because like the reality is what you described, right? Which is where when it's military, no one thinks about spending money on the military or police. They just, oh well, we just have to do that. We don't even have to think about it. We have to do that. But then they will throw that out at Democrats, and they'll keep bills from passing and vote against it, and they'll justify it by saying you Democrats and your spending is totally out of control.
Yeah, again, Chris, we are very happy to have the world's largest bombs, but we're not willing to have the
Right.
world's largest particle accelerator. We're not willing to have some
Right.
of the world's largest, most comprehensive online libraries. That stuff can't have that stuff, right? But the stuff
Right.
when it comes to bombs, having the best airline jets that'll blow stuff up, that's the stuff that we need to be spending money on, right, Chris? No, of course not.
Right. Right.
All right, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us for this one. Make sure to head over to his channel there. It's Political Perspective. I'll have a link down in the description, so make sure to hit the description, go to that link, and click on it. Go scroll through his videos, see if there's anything that you like to see there. All right, we'll see you all in the next one.